Hello. Have you ever thought about the person, maybe it's you, maybe it's someone at work, maybe it's a friend or a sibling, the person who struggles to articulate themselves, yet is still thought of as someone who is reasonably educated and reasonably intelligent, a person who struggles to explore ideas with others without their mind going blank, who, despite their better efforts, often cannot do the things without being seen as clumsy. And yet when they're on their own, when their skill level matches their effort level, and they're doing moderately complex stuff, work, and they're in sometimes what is known as a flow state, and they're having a great time, they have less of a problem producing great pieces of whatever it might be, music, art, writing, whatever. And so they have no problem performing here. Could it be that this person is lacking less in intelligence and ability, and more that it is a product of anxiety? Stress and anxiety is incredibly common. Both moderate stress and moderate anxiety can make people crumble when performing what they need or want to do, though others can thrive and perform in situations of brief, moderate to high stress, or brief to moderate high anxiety. Why do some people crumble, and why do some people not? I'm going to try and address some of why that is, using some of my favorite books, most of which I've read in their entirety, and some of my personal experience. We've all experienced anxiety. In fact, as we know, as we've been told many times, anxiety is a perfectly natural response to the way life is across the world right now. It might come across as a knot in our stomach. Sometimes it's an increased heart rate or sweaty palms. Often this racing heart or this stomach pain passes, but sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it lingers as an all-pervasive feeling of doom, or that we are just simply hurtling from one disaster, one nearly missed disaster, to another, and we don't have the social skills or the particular set of skills that this situation demands of us. And it can come with other sorts of lesser known things that have to do with performance, like a mind going blank, like nausea, dizziness, dry mouth, which sounds innocent enough, but can be quite disastrous when you're having to speak all day, every day. So that's kind of what I want to talk about, as I've said, how anxiety affects performance. I may have skipped ahead at this point, because in order to talk about how people with anxiety can flourish a bit more, we need to talk briefly about how, when the symptoms of anxiety are especially severe, or even when they're not, there's often not the luxury of reflecting on what your strengths might be and how you can get better at them. It can be hard to read or concentrate on what you're taking in. This partly explains why you might be turning to this video as well. So it's not going to be the first such video from the wider YouTube community, and it hopefully won't be the last, at least not from me as well. So apologies if it falls short of the usual high standards that you've grown to love of YouTube in the last few years. I don't want to give a very bare bones simplified account, but at the same time, I don't have a clinical background, and I don't want to bore on without chapters and a snappy structure. So I'm not a doctor, but I do want to dive fairly deep in this video, and I want to draw from some personal experience with stress and anxiety, like many of you out there might have, and I'd be interested to hear it in the comments down below. And I'm not really looking to do a personal confessional here, at least not right now, so I want to keep it fairly objective. So you might say there's a difference between stress and anxiety, even though they can be both overwhelming in their distinct ways and the intensities they come in. There are some distinct differences between the two, even though they may feel the same somatically and viscerally. As far as I understand it, somatic pain is in the muscles, bones and soft tissues, and visceral pain comes from the internal organs and blood vessels. Dr. Tracy Marks on YouTube has done a great video explaining the difference between stress and anxiety, which I recommend you go and watch, hopefully after this video, but you can always come back here. I'll leave a link below. First, let's talk about drugs, prescription drugs, obviously. I want to describe partly how we might get better at dealing with stress and anxiety without prescription drugs, despite the drugs working very well for me. I was thinking for a future video that I might do a 30-day mindfulness-based anxiety reduction thing, meditation and all sorts of other exercises from this book. That's for the future. So I can't generalize to the wider population, as there might be a particular reason why you can't or won't take prescription drugs, like beta blockers, which are very good. They're prescribed off-label because they were originally designed to deal with cardiac problems, but they are fairly effective at dealing with the negative impact that high levels of catecholamine release can have on the body. Those are the hormones noradrenaline and epinephrine, to you and me, that these might have. So these have a fairly deleterious impact. They can activate or stimulate specific receptors on the cell surface known as adrenergic receptors, and these can cause the feeling of a racing, thumping heart. And basically, this is a simplified account, the oversimplified account. Beta blockers' main job is to lessen the physical sensations that can come with this catecholamine release. They also have some secondary benefits, which I may say for a future video. I don't want to bore on, remember. So they have a very strong safety profile. They were originally designed back in the 1960s. They came onto the market in the 1960s, I should say. And in some cases, subsequently in the future decades, their benefits for anxiety were sort of discovered. So in some cases, they give people with lifelong anxiety their life back, or if they never even had one in their first place, a new beginning. And yet still, there are positive user reviews on drugs.com and the many subreddits of Reddit which suggest that the drug, in the right circumstances, can give people their lives back or kickstart one that they never really even had in the first place. And it can kind of give them a sense of confidence and relaxation that can radiate throughout their lives, their bodies, and their relationships. Perhaps that's a bit too excessive. And I'm paid by no one, obviously. So it should be good to read some reviews from real people, unless you suspect that they too are in the pocket of big pharmaceutical interest and have something to gain from getting potential patients onto a drug that is several decades old and is actually cheaper to manufacture now because they're generics. It's cheap and not really addictive, beta blockers, of which propranolol is the most popular, I think. Okay, alright, I don't want this to become a video about beta blockers. I might do one of those in the future. I'm just saying that we're going to talk about how we can deal with performance anxiety naturally, but beta blockers are quite well prescribed for performance anxiety related issues, and many sort of musicians or comedians take them. So let's move on anyway. Let's talk now about parasympathetic nervous system breathing techniques, the classic, and then in a bit talk about what feels like stress is not always stress. It may in fact be excitement, or vice versa. There are some obviously great videos about tapping into your parasympathetic nervous system with moderate to high intensity breathing and tapping into your vagus nerve as well through meditation. That's very good. I could only speak to my own personal experience, which hasn't done much meditation yet, and I would say that moderate to high intensity parasympathetic breathing, so the kind of break on your nervous system that can make it feel overwhelmed, the overwhelmed nervous system, I would say that's quite good when you're not thinking about things, when it's for amygdala based anxieties, when you have an unexpected trigger, smell, sound, an environment that just sets you off and you don't necessarily know what that it might be, and it's like an emotional wave that just comes over you. So breathing can be very good for that, less good for prefrontal cortex based anxiety where it's sort of the active thoughts, but you know, you may want to try it for prefrontal cortex based anxiety as well. So still, while parasympathetic nervous system breathing techniques can be quite good, they can take a few minutes to really work and to really calm you down, which can be kind of a bit impractical and a bit frustrating as well. Like, are they going to work? Aren't they going to work? And if you're asked to do something at work right away or do something with your friends or at home, it can be a bit frustrating. You might say, you know, they can wait. You know, after all, aren't workplaces trying to put more parity between mental health and physical health? And you know, you just might say, I need to take a minute, or you might run out of the room and not say anything at all. Taking a minute is possible, I think. Alternatively, you may also look into therapies or performance coaches for performance anxiety related issues. Obviously they are expensive, so I can't really speak to that. I can speak to the fact that I have tried student therapists for a fraction of the price in London, and they were quite good. So perhaps they are local equivalents where you are as well, and perhaps they might be open to therapy via Zoom if you're in a very remote place. Anyway, back to the parasympathetic nervous system breathing techniques though. This book, Rewire Your Anxious Brain, from two neuroscientists, it does explain the difference between amygdala-based and prefrontal cortex-based anxiety. They also talk about other effective remedies like progressive muscle relaxation and CBT, cognitive-behavioural therapy, which some people might roll their eyes at, but I think is actually, I would be a very bad YouTuber if I didn't mention it as one of the best tools in the arsenal against anxiety and specifically performance kinds. I need to do more CBT myself. I haven't really done enough to really say whether I think it's good or not. Some say it is the possibility of mastering our emotions through an act of conscious reinterpretation of the circumstances that cause those feelings. That's what Ian Robinson talks about in one of my favorite books, The Stress Test, that I need to reread properly. And I highly recommend it, but I haven't included enough of it in this video. Ian Robinson doesn't say this, so take it with a pinch of salt, but reinterpreting the circumstances that cause you to feel that the way you did in the first place might involve going back to the place where you felt that acute embarrassment and humiliation and anxiety and staying there, whether that's a comedy club or a lecture theatre. It might involve practicing the speech or whatever it is that you might do in the place that you'll eventually perform it, with some friendly faces, if you can get them, at the back to test whether they can hear you, or whatever specific aspect that might be bringing you concern. So if it's about learning the speech and whether you'll remember it, take some flashcards. As John Torrens, a sort of coach that I had a few sessions with, said to me, learn and unlearn your material so it seems natural. Time yourself doing the speech, see how long it takes, see if you have to cut material from that. Time yourself with the water breaks and the pauses as well, just to see how it would actually be. Anyway, more importantly than practicing what makes us anxious is probably getting to the thought processes that keep kind of your performance anxiety going. Fear of negative evaluation, of the smirks, of the people whispering to their person sat next to them and with a kind of malicious look in their eye. In the majority of cases, you will read that CBT can have a major difference, and I won't argue with the meta-analysis of 56 effectiveness studies that was published in the Journal of Consulting and Clinical Psychology, and that found that the contrast between pre and post therapy was large and it was positive. So it's partly about reappraising, not suppressing the negative emotions in these moments of performance anxiety. The founder of CBT himself, Aaron Beck, long maintained that our mental set determines what we feel, what we think, and what we do. So by mentally flipping what bothers us, for instance, bodily sensations, mostly for me and for a lot of other people, these bodily sensations which can feel like anxiety in one context can be quite kind of transformed through interpreting them as excitement into a kind of energy-giving invigoration. So we shouldn't forget that stress and excitement can have the same bodily symptoms. And these symptoms are the sympathetic autonomic nervous system in fight or flight or freeze modes. And there are symptoms of arousal, and this arousal is general and common to many different emotions, says Ian Robinson. Go and watch his TED Talk, it's amazing. Anxiety, excitement, anger, and sexual attraction are all part of the same kind of lot. And how do I know which emotion I'm experiencing then? Well, partly we have to look at the context. So you'll know if you're excited if you've just watched a football game and your team has just won, or the love of your life has just walked into the room. Anxiety is fairly common to this family of feelings, which have arousal as the common energy of emotions, Robinson contends, and they're experienced in a number of different ways. He discusses how a bright psychologist named Allison Brooks from Pittsburgh used this principle to a very practical effect by taking a group of people like the people in Robinson's audience, and she took them one by one to come down onto the stage and do mental arithmetic and sing karaoke in front of a critical audience. Their actual objective performance was measured. They were also wired up to a heart monitor, and they could see on a screen the pounding of their heart represented. But she made also one other small adjustment. One group of people had to say 3 words before they performed out loud. They had to say, "I feel anxious," fairly accurate representation of what was happening. But the other group, though, had to say 3 different words. They had to say, "I feel excited." And remarkably, that group, the second group, performed significantly better than the other one at karaoke and mental arithmetic in objective terms. So they performed better, and why was that? Well, Robinson says the human brain has the capacity to create its own context, in this case by language, saying 3 words, "I feel excited," and that was capable of transforming one emotion and a sense of threat into another one of excitement and a sense of challenge and possibility. I don't think I've learned this lesson properly myself yet, learned it through my body, that is, that bodily sensations are not to be feared, but some, including myself, do get worried. So if you're interested in those ideas, I highly recommend Robinson's book. I was going to finish up this video, but I decided maybe it might be a good idea to have another chapter, a little chapter about the authentic life, some comments about authenticity and anxiety, which I can maybe develop into something else later if there's demand for it in the comments. So in contrast to this common scientific explanation that being excessively anxious means that your mind and body are trying to protect you by fighting or fleeing or freezing or fawning, where you sort of cave into the threat of whatever the particular situation might be. In contrast to that, there's a kind of alternative adjacent philosophical set of perspectives which suggests that anxiety can, when it's scratched a little bit lower, contain valuable information about the life we want to be making for ourselves. And so it shouldn't be really smothered with anxiety reducing drugs, the bodily sensation of it. Kind of alternative perspective on anxiety that sees it much more than a problem to be eliminated comes from a few different European philosophers, Soren Kierkegaard, Martin Heidegger, and Jean-Paul Sartre, who take up this idea in their own way, and although they develop it in their own distinctive ways, there's quite a bit of overlap. So I'm just going to concentrate briefly on Sartre for now. In his view of things, his analysis, he says that our main ploy for escaping anxiety is denying our freedom. He calls this denial bad faith. We are in bad faith every time we make excuses and claim to be more passive and philosophically determined than we are, or might be. We say we can't help it, or we're bound to act in a certain way, and so we deny ourselves the ability to act otherwise. And this denial of freedom has a positive side, perhaps, in that it helps to keep life manageable, but according to this existential philosopher, this strategy backfires and we end up living inauthentically, out of touch with who we really are or could have been. From this point of view, the bursting through of anxiety is positive because it can jolt us out of our delusions and fake securities. It's a kind of alarm clock to grapple with how we want to be authentically. Authenticity is a funny thing, however, because we also construct who we are, not just have it handed down to us quietly and subtly by our culture, family, or our peers. Authenticity requires some serious searching about what feels good to us and what we're interested in and capable of, as well as what's obviously permissible and a whole bunch of other factors. But equally, it might be hard to know what a genuine wake-up call is and what is just a mark of an overprotected body if we genuinely enjoy most of the circumstances of our life. So if you're feeling anxiety in the C-suite, it might be for good reasons, that you never really enjoyed that corporate life anyway. But equally, it might be hard to know what you want to do with your life. So in some sense, take another route out of this now. Those who say that they can't live without anxiety-reducing drugs may very well be acting in bad faith, but they may need to find an out and stop using them. They may need to do several things. They may need to get on board with CBT. They may need to do things that are new and interesting. More to the point, while propranolol and other beta blockers don't necessarily stop you from living an authentic life that you choose or will, they do disrupt the bodily information of anxiety from happening. So that can sometimes get in the way of adrenaline, which is useful for feeling joy and excitement and a zest for life, though it doesn't necessarily disrupt emotions in the whole. But you can kind of see where I've gone with this and where I might be going with this. That's another problem of the drug from the point of view of CBT and leading a life that genuinely feels good. By getting rid of bodily sensations that you think are dangerous, you don't have the opportunity to reframe what you're feeling in a positive way. That paper-thin distinction between stress and excitement that Ian Robertson has already told us about. Well, not, he hasn't actually been here, but you know, of course, if you're genuinely in danger, that's another thing entirely. And it might not always be possible to positively reframe everything. And you may just want to dampen some very, very powerful bodily sensations down a bit. So I can completely understand it from both sides. If you've enjoyed this video, let me know which part of it you enjoyed the most so I can maybe concentrate on that and make something for you, because I am at your command basically. And if you've liked it, give it a thumbs up, share it with a friend, or don't. But I do need to eat, so that would be great if I could get some traction with this, but it's all good. Anyway, I will see you potentially in another video soon.